Okay, so we are now at the point where you're going to get into the anatomy of a dungeon and how you found the
Yes.
resources to build it and how it is working in the part of the world that you've already constructed.
So we started to dip into adventures when I was talking about the big bad evil guy, but we're now going to turn to the page where it is now relevant to the specific dungeon. So there's different types of adventures and they're laid out. The first type is on page 72 of the
Okay,
Dungeon Master's Guide. And this is called the location-based adventure.
got it.
And it's literally what it says on the tin. It is based around a location, usually a dungeon or a wilderness location or some other area, like maybe a ship that they have to seize control of because we're in basically a pirate campaign. So I decided that it would be a dungeon. So I decided there would be 4 points of rest, basically, for the characters. And there would be 4 points of like dangerous dungeon areas, basically corresponding to 1 dungeon per level, but it's kind of more loosey than that because I tend to prefer building open worlds. So it is possible for the players to bypass dungeon number 1, and it will not hurt the story. And the reason it will not is specifically because of the first point, dungeon goals, which is on page 73, the next page.
Yep.
It is a chart that I rolled on randomly to determine the goal for this dungeon. And I got number 9. No, not number 9. Discover... Where is it? Where am I? It was something about interest. Oh, there, 16. Discover why a villain is interested in the dungeon. Right?
Okay.
So that by itself didn't tell me much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until we rolled the villain, the adventure villain, which is on the next page. And I rolled a 2 for adventure villains, which is an aberration bent on corruption or domination. So originally, this becomes PCs will discover why an aberration bent on corruption or domination is interested in the dungeon. So I figured, well, since I'm tailoring this to levels 1 to 4, I should find an aberration that can be, defeated if possible.
Buddha, thank you for the cheer.
So I looked through the book, and basically the only 2 that are quote-unquote level appropriate
Mm-hmm.
are the Intellect Devourer and the Nothic. And I went with the Nothic because of other rolls I did.
Okay.
Which basically they like I did all the rolls first, but I'm kind of going through my choices. So the Nothic is for a certain reason that we'll get to in a second.
Okay.
So then I rolled for an adventure ally, and I got a Fey ally. And again, I wanted something kind of level appropriate that wouldn't, outperform the party, that wouldn't make them feel less heroic, but something they could become attached to maybe, or something that might help them. Also because Nothics are pretty dangerous, especially to a first level party. So I decided on a blink dog. And then for the patron, I rolled a retired adventurer. So I decided that the blink dog and the retired adventurer would have been companions that went on adventures together. Just tying together the rolls I made.
Okay.
And that's the basic way to make a dungeon, with those four tables, basically.
And again, if you're an inexperienced person who doesn't know maybe a lot about monsters, or you haven't run through a ton of dungeons in your life, the book has guided you through a set of random rolls. And as long as you can just come up with some feasible connection, how strong or weak, well, that doesn't really matter. Can you at least connect the dots that are put out there, and you'll have a solid concept. It'll hold your hand through it.
Yes. So basically, I have the dungeon goal, discover why a villain is interested in the dungeon. I have the adventure villain, aberration bent on corruption or domination. The adventure ally is a fey ally. The adventure patron is a retired adventurer. And then to flesh out the dungeon, you turn to chapter 5.
In the DMG?
Yes. And this is adventure environments. This is for fleshing out any kind of location type area. So for the dungeon location chart, I rolled beneath a temple.
Okay.
So already my brain makes the connection, because we put a lot of temples in Makellar.
Oh, yes.
Right? And we tied at least a couple of them to players. So this dungeon is underneath one temple in Makellar. Again, I didn't specify what temple it would be under yet, but I kind of eventually did, because I didn't know what kind of deities we'd be using yet. Then I rolled for dungeon creators. I got, it's on page 100.
Going to it right now. There we go. Dungeon creator.
Yes.
Which you have here. I'm gonna scroll up. There we go. I'm trying to keep it at the top and relevant.
So for dungeon creator, I rolled humans, and it asked me to roll on the NPC alignment and NPC class table to determine the specifics. So for alignment, I got lawful good, and for class, they're the charts a little bit further down. I got wizard. Right.
Yep, I'm following along. I'm highlighting the charts as you're discussing them. So if anyone has a DMG open at home, they can follow along and see what you're saying. I'm your Vanna White to your Pat Sajak here.
Wow. Calling me old.
I'm calling me beautiful.
Okay. So what I did here for the adventure villains, because of what Nothics are specifically, I made a command decision for the adventure that these wizards, who were originally humans, were changed into Nothics. And they are the adventure villain, the aberrations. However, I decided then that it would be kind of silly if they were humans because there's a lot of gnome stuff going on, so I made them gnomes. So that's how we got the adventure villains, the 3 lawful good gnome wizards. Then I decided they'd be from Lukuna City because in Makellar, at least, I haven't fleshed out any other points, but in Makellar at least there's no wizard guilds, right? It is the headquarters for the merchant guild family.
Yes, and,
So,
and there's a couple temples to pray to, but there's not an arcane presence.
right. And so, interestingly, I trusted myself to the dice gods, and a lot of the rolls now reflected this story that was coming up in my head. So for dungeon purpose chart, I rolled that it was a temple or a shrine. So not only is it beneath a temple, it is itself a temple, which was interesting. And then for the dungeon history, I rolled that it was abandoned by its creators, and all I added to that was when they became Nothics, because Nothics, right?
Well, yeah, I mean they're not going to have the same lifestyle needs or interests as who they once were.
Right. So that's how I fleshed it out, and then I thought, all right, I've got kind of an idea now of what's going on. Let's do the adventure introduction table. So again, this adventure introduction is not 100% my thing, but I did take a lot from the stuff we had already generated and added it to it. So in the adventure introduction table, which is on page 74.
Let me go back to that real quick. 74.
For those of you following along, is I rolled a town or village needs volunteers to go to the adventure location, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in here, I just added that when the PCs first arrive in Makellar, they should meet up with Lang, who is the patron who gives them the quest, and his blink dog companion Mina, who is going to be their ally. So already we've got these things sewn together into the introduction. And of course he tells them that he needs volunteers to go into the dungeon. And what does he specifically tell them? Well, that's under the adventure patron thing. I gave him a little bit more information there. Specifically, the adventure patron. Specifically, I tied the information he knows to the adventure climax, which is the last thing you roll. And in our adventure climax, we got the villain and 2 or 3 lieutenants perform separate rites in a large room. The adventurers must disrupt all the rites at the same time. Right, so what is this rite? Well, this is where I made a command decision again, because I wasn't sure what pantheons or gods or what Maddie wanted to do for that kind of stuff. And because this is very religious based, I wanted to kind of tie that in.
And I'll tell you, for the characters that we randomly generated this week, this type of a dungeon will actually be a little bit, well, it could presumably be a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
As we discovered when we did their party write-up,
none of them have Arcana.
No one's proficient in Arcana, nor investigation, nor religion. We have no divine classes, and the one intelligence skill that we do have some redundancy. Our 2 characters are at odds with each other, and they might remember history a little bit differently.
Yes.
But still, if you're making a generic dungeon, hey, you roll with it, right? As a DM, you don't know who's going to run for for your content. I mean, maybe you do if you really want to customize.
Yeah,
But
if you know your players and their characters before you start writing, like if Maddie had given me all of the documents, and then I had like a week or two to write, I could tailor it more to the party outline here, but I didn't, so I was writing in a vacuum.
and I think that's going to be fine because honestly, especially for an introductory adventure when we're trying to get to know our characters, right? If we're all level 1 or 2 or something by this point,
Yeah,
um, this is going to be a good lesson in teamwork in order to try and make up for a lack of proficiency with perhaps advantage. So we're aiding each other as best as we can. Or it's going to make sure that early on in the adventure, we realize, oh, we need to go to these temples and make friends with the people who run it, because then we can ask them and we'll pick their brains for information instead. So it can actually, it'll be a bit of a pinch maybe at times, but it'll set up an investment in the world for the party, because they're going to need these religious outlets in order to help answer questions.
yes. So this is actually for Tin Cat and other people making their own stuff. After you figure out the assumptions, the core, the like the thesis statement, what is true about your world, then you can work on who the deities are. And this is in Appendix B of the Player's Handbook right now. They have a bunch of different deity tables. You, of course, have the Forgotten Realms one, which everyone uses, and nobody looks at the others. But they also have the Greyhawk deities, Dragonlance deities, the Eberron deities, and non-human deities for races that are not human. So these are all good if you're playing in these established campaign settings. And the non-human deities are basically Forgotten Realms as well, because that's pervasive everywhere. But, you know, if you want a more, I wouldn't say custom, because there are rules in the DMG for making your own custom pantheons, which I can find the page for that, but starting on page 297, is a special section of the Player's Handbook that I've rarely seen used, and I would like to see more used. It gives you pantheons from our world.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically the Celtic, the Greek, Egyptian, and the Norse pantheon. I rolled a d4 to pick it. I got Celtic. And so all I did then was look down the list of deities. I didn't look at their domains, their alignment, or their symbols. I looked at what they were named, what they were called, and what they were god of. And I saw, oh, Math-Mthonwe, god of magic. I wonder what 3 gnome wizards would build a temple to. Might it be the god of magic? So that's why, for the purpose, we have it built as a shrine or temple. So I added that it was built as a temple to Math-Mthonwe. And then, when I found out his alignment was neutral evil, I decided that he was the one who was responsible for turning the gnome wizards into Nothics. We don't know why. That's something, again, that can be left up to individual DMs. But he was the one who basically did this.
And
Right?
by creating little pockets of doubt or without having hard and fast knowledge, I find that lets you examine the feedback of your characters as a DM of your player characters, and it lets you customize the content more towards, oh, this is cool, because you're going to get that table talk, and then you can sit back as a DM and say, yeah, that is cool, and isn't it really neat that it just so happens at this moment in the dungeon you guys knew the whole time. I'm not saying that in a patronizing way. It's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor as a DM, but you don't have to have everything, like super everything listed out. I take a philosophy that a plan is a list of things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
So you got to have these bleed-off valves for creativity. I'm sorry, go ahead and continue.
I was just going to say that if I had my druthers, nobody in the world knows what alignment is because they do not read the player's handbook in the game world. So Mathmathanoi is the god of all magic, not just evil magic. He's the god of lawful magic, he's the god of good magic. It just happens that he leans more towards precious acts, right? Like turning people into Nothics. So that explains why lawful good gnome wizards would build a temple to him, because they're magic users, and so there's no other god of magic, right? Just Mathmathanoi.
Yeah, alignment, that often comes up in conversations on this channel, and at tables all around D&D players' areas. It's a part of a character or a part of a concept. The alignment itself is not the character or the concept. And I think you did a very good job of explaining that, or why, yes, just because the PHB lists him as neutral evil doesn't mean that that this deity is an evil god. You know, like, oh, I'm all about, you know, raising zombie babies and, you know, killing dogs with necrotic rays. You know, it's not necessarily about that. It could even just be, if you're a wizard, maybe you're more selfish because you're trying to accumulate knowledge to yourself. You're trying to accumulate this power and use it to your own ends, which you may very well believe are good ends, but you're the only one who can do it. And so evil is a lot of times just cast as selfish. You know, you have selflessness, which is generally more quote unquote good, and selfishness, which is quote unquote evil.
Well, especially also since you don't like, he's also the god of all magic, including divine magic, right?
So you'd almost just argue he's just true neutral. It can go anywhere.
Well,
in a broader sense. I don't want to define him by a couple letters.
But you could be a lawful good knowledge cleric and still worship Mathmathanoi, especially in 5th edition, where there is no alignment restrictions on a cleric choosing a certain deity.
Yes, and I'm very appreciative of that.
Yes. Alignment is mechanically unimportant. I would say it is important. Okay, are you guys ready for another tangent?
I'm ready.
And are you ready for me to blow your mind?
Uh-oh. All right, everyone. Here we go.
Alignment was not originally your character's personality, it was your character's belief system. In 1st edition, its concept was supposed to be something like a religion in itself, right? Lawful creatures shared certain beliefs, certain rituals. They even shared a certain similar language. Alignments, people of the same alignments could speak to each other with like hand gestures and stuff. And Gary Gygax, the guy who created D&D, kind of based it on the idea that if you're like a Catholic in 2 different parts of the world, your belief structures and your, like, the way you pray and the language of Latin are all sort of things that you share, right? So somebody of neutral evil alignment, that's their belief system. It doesn't mean they are evil. It means it doesn't mean they act evil. It means
Their uniform?
They have evil beliefs that not necessarily they have to act on, right? So yeah, that's a little alignment history there. But yeah, nowadays people equate it to personality, which is where a lot of arguments come in, because personalities are not as structured as belief systems.
Kruger, welcome, and also for Zone Z, thank you very much for the follow. While you were talking, Ivelon, I was listening to you, and I was also responding to chat over here.
Yes. So
I'm sorry, real quick too.
Yeah.
Everyone, as we might have new people here in chat, either completely new to the channel or newer and are just joining us. Ivelon, if you Ivelon, if you want to post a link over to your channel, do you have VODs of you creating this stuff?
Yeah, there still should be from this week.
Okay.
I think there might be a couple from last week.
Make sure you go over to Ivelon's channel if you want to know some more information and check out his work. As he was doing it, because he's been working on this presentation for about 2 weeks now, and you can see it being crafted from the ground up. I'm sorry, what would you say?
You'll get to hear me suffer, because I suffered a lot.
Yep, there he'll wiggle and squirm and suffer right in front of you. Oh, Tycho? Oh, you're gonna go back to lurking? All right.
So yeah, I was gonna say once I picked the pantheon and the deity, a lot of things fell into place. So I saw you pulled up the Nothic there, so we'll go to the Nothic.
Sure. There we go.
All right, so don't look at the stat block yet. I mean, you'll see it, but what I focused on first are the traits. Remember, we highlighted the traits of dragons, of halflings. So every entry in the monster manual has these bolded, italicized traits that basically sum up the feeling the monster should give you. And the first trait for the Nothic is a cursed arcanist, right? So they were once arcane magic users who have been cursed with this aberrant form, right? So this makes sense that people who built the dungeon were wizards. They built the dungeon to the god of magic, because when you're practicing wizard and you want to like delve into spells, you pray for good luck to the magic god.
Real quick, Ivelon, do you want to address Carnal Anagram's proposition in chat? Or the question?
Personality, rather. I mean, lawful good power you can get as long chaotic once you get used to it. Oh, my argument that alignments should not be based on personality. And I believe a lawful good paladin can get along with a chaotic evil barbarian. But yeah, so what was I saying? Yeah, the dungeon was created by wizards for like magic god. The magic god turned them into Nothics.
Mm-hmm.
And they are searching for a way to turn back to normal. Right? So, oh, I forgot about something. Sorry, my brain's all jumbled up now. So, Nothics says right there, under Cursed Arcanics, Nothics retain no awareness of their former self. Right? And I was okay with that until I read Lurkers in Magical Places, where it said that they are driven by the vague knowledge that there exists a method to reverse their condition. So how can you at the same time have no awareness of what you used to be and have a vague awareness that what you are now is not what you were before, right? I couldn't figure out a way to reconcile them.
So you made a judgment call as a DM.
Yes, and I decided that these Nothics still remember being gnomes. They are still in their thoughts and everything. They are still the lawful good gnome wizards.
So in this case, they're Nothics with a GN.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. So they are searching for a way to turn back to normal, right?
Yep.
And they still retain all of their stuff. So what that means is that our climax involves a rite that the players have to stop. So if they're lawful good gnome wizards, why might they get into a combat with the party? Well, maybe the ritual that the players are trying to stop is the thing that will turn them back to regular gnomes. Of course, the players don't know this, and now this gives a great goal for your villain, beyond just being, oh, the party has to fight them because it's D&D and they're monsters, right?
Yeah, that's the default, kind of mentality we use to suspend disbelief, but if you can approach it perhaps in a slightly different way, it might add a little bit more investment by your players.
Yes. Especially if they learn what happened. It's a moral quandary, right?
Yes.
So, I then took the dungeon goal of discover why villain is interested in the dungeon. I decided that the Nothics were not the real quote-unquote villain, but the guy who had his, excuse the phrase, his fangs in the dungeon for nefarious purposes was our big bad evil guy, the powerful wizard dragon who can cast spells and shapeshift.
Yes.
And you're gonna have to do a bunch of scrolling again to get down to page 8.
Sure, no problem. 6, 7, and 8. Here we go.
So I had rolled for his event-based actions and the event-based goals of the adventure of the campaign.
Okay.
So the actions are he commits serial crimes, and the goal is to protect an object, and that will come up a little bit later. So we're going to scroll all the way back up again.
Okay.
And this is where we start actually filling these sentences out from the random rolls I did on the table, right? So instead of discover why villain, PCs should discover that a very powerful gnome wizard, because remember, he comes to Lukuna in the guise of a powerful wizard, named Phil Fullcord Glitterhammer. He's interested in the dungeon. Why? Because he wants to use it to make contact with Mathmthonway, the god of magic, the same god that the temple was originally built for, the same god who turned the gnome wizards into Nothics, and he wants to ask the god to turn them back into gnomes. Or so he says. Because what's really going on is Phil is a young red dragon named Philoki Pyron. What he really wants to ask about is location of the Book of Vile Darkness. So already in the first dungeon, the first adventure, we are seeing the event-based campaign goal of you want to keep him from getting that book, right?
Yes.
But that's just the seed, right? The rest of the adventure inside the dungeon has nothing to do with it unless something very specific happens. Players should not learn that yet. but everything above what the PCs don't know is something they can learn in the dungeon.
Yeah, this is just a seed to plant
Yes,
within the dungeon over the 4 levels of the campaign.
yes. And so we flesh out the villains, the 3 lawful good gnome wizards from Lukuna City. They are Eliwick, Nissa, and Ren, full core Glitterhammer. So you can see the dragon has cloaked himself in the guise of a full core Glitterhammer, who, might reasonably be interested in bringing his relatives back to normalcy. With this magical ritual to contact a god. So it's easy there. And the full cores are just like the Garricks from McKellar. The full cores are gnome wizards. They're family of gnome wizards from Lukuna City. They're basically the Mage Guild. Which is why he pretends to be one, because he's a powerful gnome wizard. So that's what I added to the dungeon creator portion. None of this is really, I think at least, I could be wrong, none of this I think is really requires great leaps of creativity. I'm just going back and forth and connecting everything, like stitching or threading these pieces together. So then for the adventure ally, we already know it's a blink dog named Mabina, and we know that she was, I didn't state it here, but I assumed she was a companion with Lang, because in our introduction we put that they meet up, with Lang and his blink dog companion Mabina. So I do put it out there, but it's not really a big thing I flesh out. The important thing I flesh out here is actually running Mabina as a companion. So this is dungeon master advice now, and I see Maddie's just brought it up. So normally what you do as a dungeon master is you would run this as an NPC for the party. You would roll its initiative, you would role play it doing stuff, you would take its turns in combat. But for me, who is, I wouldn't say I'm a super experienced DM. I don't have like 30 or 40 years behind my belt. I have like maybe 15 years.
I don't know. I think that makes you pretty venerable.
Well, not all of it's D&D and not all of it is consecutive, right? But I started 15 years ago. So, but even me, who's, I can say I'm not a newbie DM. I have given the party NPC allies and forgotten to roll their initiative, forgotten with their with the party, because as a dungeon master, you are mainly concerned with the obstacle, and an ally is not an obstacle usually. And Mabina is definitely not an obstacle. So what I would suggest for new DMs is give the allies to your players to run. Like put this stat block in front of them in some way, and tell them this is now a resource you can use. It has its own turn, it has its own stuff. So what I did here was I made her take a liking to the PC with the highest charisma. So which PC in our group has the highest charisma? And this would be the score, not the modifier.
It looks like it's going to end up being Granny.
Yeah.
Granny, actually, this is funny.
Yeah.
All right, now if this is level 1, you could argue that their stats are probably going to be close to the same. Granny's probably going to win due to the fact that she's a bard.
Yeah.
But May is going to end up having the second highest, and those two are bitter rivals. So Granny's probably going to win, but it would be interesting if each of them at level 1 had the same, the same high charisma, and it would be up to the
Yes.
dog to choose which one of the rivals it would follow.
Yes, exactly. And to represent that, the PCs who are tied each roll a d20 to decide who gets it. So that would be a great thing there. And then, yeah, right, let the PC control Mabina, but remind the PCs that Mabina is also a thing in the world, right? She's not just a stat block that you give to the player. She has her own thoughts, her own emotions, especially since blink dogs are not dogs. They are fey creatures. They have an intelligence score of 10. They're as smart as a human. They can speak.
I'm sorry, real quick, Ivelon.
Yeah.
Carnal Anagram threw out a good question from a beginner DM.
As a hopeful future DM, I hope you are too. How do you, if you do, not give up all information if they get the unfortunate perfect roll, such as this scenario? Well, in this scenario specifically, I have not tied any informations into roles. All of this information is given to the players organically, except for the goals for Phil, which PCs don't know and should not know, even if they roll really high. Everything else are things that they are supposed to learn. That's why it's good to set out dungeon goals beforehand, right? I literally say that the PCs in this dungeon should discover that Phil is wanting to contact a god and ask him to turn Nothics back into gnomes. The other thing you can do is make sure that the way they gather information does not have all of the information, right? Compartmentalize it. So the adventure patron here is Lang, who knows some of the dungeon goal information. He knows that he knows there's a powerful gnome wizard named Phil, tells it to the party. He can also tell you that Phil is trying to use the dungeon to summon the god. But Lang doesn't know why. And even if you roll a 30 on a knowledge check, which you won't do at level 1, Lang still is not going to know why Phil is trying to contact Smithanoi. In fact, that's the reason he wants the PCs to investigate the dungeon. He wants to find out what is going on. Why is this guy trying to summon a god? Summoning god is not a very good thing to do usually.
Well, while you're narrating, Ivelon, I was typing a parallel reply as well, so don't let me distract you.
Oh, that's fine. But
if that answered your question, Colonel Anagram, if Ivelon did, awesome. If not, if you need further clarification or if you find that you're still in a conundrum, please ask. Because yes, we are presenting this information to you. I mean, I say we. I'm riding the shotgun. Ivelon has the wheel here.
yes.
But you can interrupt us. You can ask a question, especially if you're a beginner DM. That's the entire point of why we broadcast this information to you all. We want to help onboard you to D&D, to role playing. I mean, really to role playing through the portal of D&D. That's what we're specializing in. But that was a very good question, and you know what? There's probably people here who are lurking who might have been wondering the same thing, and you asked the question that now answered it for several other people. So ask questions and engage in chat, because it's not just the presenter here or the presenter, well, the mysterious voice floating in our ears here. You can also get some other opinions from the other chatters, who all have played for different amounts of years through different systems, and you might walk away from the same question with 2 or 3 different answers or opinions. And that means you can go with the one that you think is going to fit best with your style.
Yeah. And ask me questions. I am really good at tangents and getting off topic. But yeah, so my solution for not worrying about like forgetting Mabina's there is give them to the player. The player has less to worry about, and if they have this extra tool to help them, especially if they're a fighting type player who likes combat, or if they just like the idea of having a companion, they get to run it. But to represent that Mabina is her own thing, and this again is an obstacle, right? This stat that I'm giving here is something that you will remember to track because it has possible negative effect for the party. So it's not something you're going to forget as a DM, whereas Mabina might easily be forgotten because you're running all of the stuff in the dungeon and everything, and remembering something that doesn't provide any threats to the party is not always easy, as even being a semi-experienced dungeon master. So what I did here... Oh, Maddie's still typing. I'll wait for a sec.
I'm good. I'm good now.
Okay. So what I did here is on page 93 of the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Okay, I'm going to it right now.
Really good optional rule if you do take my advice and let your players run NPC allies. It is called loyalty.
I highlighted it.
And this is a way to track basically like the approval scores in Dragon Age or in other modern RPGs where you have a party and you basically control them in combat, but then through dialogue choices and stuff or quest choices, they either approve or disapprove of what you've done. It's kind of the same feeling. So loyalty is defined as at least the starting loyalty, sorry, is defined as half of the PC's charisma. So Granny, who won 17 charisma, gives 8 loyalty to Mabina. So Mabina has 8 loyalty for Granny, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole bunch of paragraphs there that explain stuff. And I basically took them and tried to condense them into very easy to follow guidelines. So whenever any PC in the party, not just Granny, spends their resources like spells or potions or whatever on Mabina, you can roll a d4 and add it to her starting loyalty. So you do roll a d4 and add it to 8 to represent her gratitude. And if any PC in the party abuses, misleads, or endangers her, you would subtract a d4 to show her disapproval. Oh yeah, and if the PCs rescue her from danger instead of endangering her, that's also a d4. So the rule here is if her loyalty drops to 0, she leaves the party. Kind of like if your approval rating drops to 0 in Dragon Age, you lose your companion. And if her approval is if her loyalty is 10 or higher at the end of the adventure, basically when everything in the dungeon is resolved, she will continue to follow that PC on further adventures instead of returning to Lane.
And this is an example of a DM who is using an optional rule from the DMG, and I would presume as a DM you are going to, when you introduce this mechanic, you're gonna maybe give a handout or something to your players. Here are the rules for this mechanic that we're playing with for the dungeon, of some kind. You don't have to reveal all the exact numbers, but here's how here's how loyalty is going to generally work in a meta conversation. Am I correct? And
Yes.
then you've further customized it for the unique nature of what's happening here.
Yes.
Okay.
The flavor idea behind it that I haven't typed out yet is that Labina kind of didn't want to retire because she's Fae. Fae are long-lived creatures. So the human is like super old or at retirement age. He's too old for adventuring. But Mabina kind of still longs for adventure. So if she finds a party that treats her right and they all survive this adventure together and bond, then she will go with you. If you don't treat her particularly well and you don't treat her particularly bad, then she's not going to leave the party. She's also not going to bond with you in any way, and she'll probably return to Lang afterwards. So that was
You got
my
to use her
thinking
for the
that.
dungeon, but then that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then what else here? Our dungeon location was beneath a temple.
Mm-hmm.
Then I made it to Donatus. I had basically decided it was going to be the god of mountains or the god of oceans because of where Lukuna is situated in the world. So I rolled for it, and we got the mountain god. It was built by gnome wizards. We went through these. It was abandoned. Right, and when the PCs first arrive in Makellar, they should meet with Lang and Mabina. He tells them he needs volunteers to go into the dungeon. Players will probably ask why. And then we say that, well, there's this dude who's trying to do some bad juju. And what's up with that? Go check out, basically. So then we get to our adventure climax. If you remember, the original climax was basically that a villain and 2 or 3 lieutenants are performing separate rites in a large room, and the PCs have to disrupt all the rites at the same time. So
You're there? Okay, it sounded like you might have cut out for a second.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Okay, I still hear you now.
Okay.
We're good. We're good.
So I fleshed this out into basically the text for the encounter, just to show you how I would do this kind of thing. So the villain is Phil. He is not someone the player characters can kill. They don't know that, but it's true. And 2 or 3 of his quote-unquote lieutenants are going to be the Nothics. And they are going to be performing 4 separate rites. Basically, they're going to be like in the 4 corners of the room, doing their magical circle, chanting stuff, whatever. Again, specific details can be up to PM to summon the god. And the PCs must disrupt all the rites at the same time to stop God from being summoned. So the first thing I did was actually I developed this Arcana skill challenge first. So this is something I took from 4th edition D&D. And basically, characters who are proficient in Arcana can roll and add their roll to something called a group check.
That is something that's something similar that I've also carried forward from 4th edition.
Yes.
For people who are proficient, you might discriminate and say, all right, anyone who's proficient in this skill can actually roll. Because you might have a smart individual who would have a 4 intelligence but not be proficient, and then you might have a low intelligence person but who took proficiency in Arcana, and the person who went out of their way to study it might be the tiebreaker, like 51-49. So even though it's the same score, that person took the proficiency and therefore would be the preferred roller.
Yes. And they have to roll 4 successes before 3 failures.
Are
This
you
is,
real quick? I'm sorry again to interrupt you.
yeah.
Are we on your sheet somewhere here? Like I'm looking at stat blocks. I see your corridors. Do you have this
Oh,
someplace that you want me to?
yes. Scroll up a little bit. Page 3.
Okay,
It's at the very top of page 3. Sorry about that.
I'm there.
Okay. So, with the DC 10 Arcana skill challenge, the PC or PCs who are proficient in Arcana need to roll 4 successes before 3 failure. And this is a mechanical consideration as well as a story one, because they need 4 successes because there are 4 rights. And they need more successes than failures because it's a mechanical thing from 4E. And the DC is 10 because it shouldn't be super terrible to interrupt, because it's a pretty involved thing to summon a god, right?
Mm.
The the more complex and powerful the spell, in my mind, the easier it should be to interrupt. Right? If you're casting something like Magic Missile, you just point your hand and a dart comes out and it auto hits the person. That thing is going to be extremely hard to do and stop unless you have Counterspell. It's pretty much, or Shield. Those are pretty much the only 2 spells in all of D&D that stop a Magic Missile, I think.
But if you're doing a complex ritual that requires setup and material components and magic words and magic finger wiggles and whatnot,
And 4 people,
yeah, and 4 people.
and it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so the group check means each PC's success or failure gets added. So let's say you have 4, the average 4 first level PCs. Our party is 5. None of them have Arcana though.
Yeah.
So we're going to take the imaginary 4 first level PC adventuring party. And let's say all 4 of them have Arcana, right? So that means in one round, you can have 4 Arcana rolls, which means in one round you've basically either succeeded or failed. For the ones who don't have Arcana, they can give advantage to this roll instead, as kind of like helping out their team. So if they succeed on the 4 successes, the whole ritual is shut down. And if they fail, the god is summoned into the room. So that's the easy one. The harder one to do is if they don't opt for a puzzle way out and they just want to clobber the Nothics and Phil. I had some trouble trying to balance this, and I'm still not 100% happy with it, but it's what I got. So basically, there's this rule for spellcasting called concentration.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that can interrupt spells, basically. Can lose concentration and the spell will fizzle out. So thematically, this happens when you take damage, are incapacitated, or you cast another spell that requires concentration. So I chose to just mention damage here, because that's probably the most common thing that they're going to do. It's probably going to be very hard for them to incapacitate anything at first level. And usually when you take damage during concentration, you have a DC to see if you can keep your concentration or not. I've made a DM ruling here that there is no DC. If they take damage, they will break concentration. And the reason I did that is because the PCs have to make all 4 NPCs break concentration basically at the same time, right? That's what the role gave us. I mean, we could rule that it doesn't have to be all at the same time. We just have to, one by one, hit them. But I like this kind of puzzle thing. It also works out if you have an AoE spellcaster, like a Thunderwave spell.
Mm-hmm. You're highlighting an important concept, by the way, especially in dungeon creation. Often have 2 different ways to do something, because your
Yes.
party might not be good at a particular route, might not think of a particular route, or just have a critical failure in something, and it's in one way is just completely blocked off in some fashion. So
Yeah.
you're providing an alternate.
I might even make the skill challenge Arcana or Religion, just to give more options to
Yep.
players. Always have options. Like, you could also talk. You could do social combat with the Nothics and Phil, and try and convince them not to do it. Or maybe if you've learned from here why they're doing it, you might support them, right? Because you will have learned that they want to turn back into normal, right? And what's wrong with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't just have to wholesale slaughter them. You could help them.
Yeah.
Take the good route. Choose the good karma.
So this is what I like about adventure climaxes or quote unquote boss battles. I like to have multiple story avenues. That way, if the PCs pick one route, you can be flexible, right? So yeah, this whole concentration thing is kind of a mess. But basically the idea is PCs have to disrupt all the raids at the same time to stop the summoning. If they don't, he's summoned. All right. If he's summoned, Phil is going to reveal his true identity and reveal to the players and the Nothics that, you know, he's literally going to straight up ask the god for the location of the Book of Vile Darkness. And what happens then again is up to the DM and the players. And I also put a note that this should also happen, like if the players decide not to investigate the dungeon and they do something else, he will have succeeded, and the players will not have learned anything.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
So you can get a neutral result. It doesn't have to be just that binary good, evil, black, white, win, lose. You can
Yes.
have another result.
Oh yes, maybe Mathmathonway doesn't care and won't answer Phil.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe he's curious what Phil will do and give it to him. Maybe they have a conversation. Maybe he turns to the PCs and does something else the Dungeon Master has planned. All of these can be fleshed out. Maybe maybe he's just being contacted and it's just his voice or an avatar that appears, or maybe he's actually summoned into the world and he decides not to go back to the realm of the gods. And now you've got this god wandering around doing crazy things.
What have we done?
Yeah. Just play with it. That's the fun, in my opinion. It's a lot more fun than, you know, I hit the Nothic. I've also kind of set up that if they do the I hit the Nothic thing, they aren't going to be able to down Phil. Because mechanically Phil has over 170 hit points. But he most likely doesn't care about the and won't be actively trying to kill them. He's just there for the information at the moment. It's kind of weird. The best thing the PCs can do to piss Phil off is to keep him from learning the location of the Book of Darkness, Vile Darkness. Anything else they do, probably he's indifferent to. So that is my overview of the dungeon, and you'll notice none of these tell you what room they're in. None of these tell you what monsters are where, or what. This is all just, what does this dungeon mean in terms of the game, and how to react, I guess.
Well, also, where did you source your information? If you're not sure where to begin building a dungeon, you cited everything you used, all the pages, all the tables that can give you inspiration.
Yes, and I think someone earlier asked, and I didn't answer them, is it a good idea to do this for everything, like randomly generate an entire campaign? Yes and no. So if you're just beginning, it is good to start with page, what was it? The create a campaign thing. Creating a campaign on page 25. So when you first start building your campaign, you should start small. Create the home base for the PCs, which in my case was McKellar. And then create a local region with, maybe a couple dungeons. You don't have to do 4 dungeons. You can have 2, and you can have like one extra settlement, like in the same region, usually a step below. So if you create a city as your home base, make the town the extra settlement. Or if you create a town like I did, make it the village, make it a step down, because the home base should be like the headquarters, and then you branch out. But yeah, all you have to do is create the home base, like a dungeon or 2, and a village, and you can do those all randomly for the start. And then once you've done that, you can from that craft a starting adventure, which is kind of like what I did here, this dungeon. And that's all you need to start playing. You don't have to build anything else about the world. Start zoomed in on what the players will see for the first adventure, and maybe the area around it. And
you don't worry about what's happening in global politics when you just have to worry about how to keep goblins out of the cornfield at the local farmers area. Ivelon, if it's all right by you, I'm gonna take another 5-minute break or so. I think there might be some other tips or tricks you can offer chat while I'm away. Though I will go to the short rest screen and mute my own mic. You are welcome to continue your commentary. All right.
Okie dokie.
All right. So everyone, I'm gonna be back 5 or 10 minutes, and then Ivelon, it sounds like he's gonna lurk. You can ask him particular questions, and when I come back, if I have 2 copper to throw in on it too, I will. Otherwise, Ivelon's been an amazing guest DM. And when we do come back, Ivelon, are you willing to go through the dungeon that you made here? I think you did a lot of the setup. Can you talk a little bit about what does all this stuff here mean? Chamber, rectangle, 20 by 30, 1 corridor, etc.
It's a giant mess. I can take you through it. It's not pretty, and it's not really ready, but yeah.
That's fine, because I think we really got to the core of what this is about. I mean,
yes.
How long the passage is, does it turn left or right? That doesn't matter as much as we have identified the heart and soul of this dungeon. It exists for a reason, and it's going to do something. And then the corridors will just tell you kind of how you get there. All right. Well, anyway, I'm gonna take this quick break. Ivlon, if you're lurking, you have the wheel.
Yeah. I feel like I need something to drink too,
Okay.
so I will be back.